The headset weighed ounces, but tonight it felt like 40 pounds of steel. 14 years ago, Joanne traded the cockpit for a desk, swapping Mach 2 for stale coffee and glowing radar screens. Then the distress channel cracked open, and a bleeding, blind F-16 pilot begged her for his life. Joanne's coffee was always cold by 0300. It was a universally acknowledged truth in the Tactical Operations Center, a sprawling, windowless bunker buried beneath 2 feet of reinforced concrete somewhere in the Nevada desert. Above her, the night sky was vast, clear, and utterly empty. Down here, the world was reduced to glowing green blips creeping across flat liquid crystal displays. It had been 14 years since she last touched the throttle of an F-16. 14 years since a catastrophic engine failure over a hostile mountain range had compressed her spine, grounded her for life, and left her with a permanent limp. The Air Force, in its infinite bureaucratic mercy, had handed her a civilian contractor badge and a headset. They called it retaining institutional knowledge. Joanne called it a life sentence. She took a sip from the styrofoam cup, grimacing at the bitter sludge, and shifted her weight in the ergonomic chair that did nothing for the ache in her lower back. The room hummed with the white noise of cooling servers and the low, lethargic murmur of air traffic controllers managing the midnight training rotations. It was a graveyard shift filled with routine check-ins, bingo fuel calls, and the occasional navigational correction for a tired lieutenant. To her left, Gary, a 20-something controller who treated the radar screen like a video game he was bored of playing, let out a loud yawn. He tapped his pen against the console. "Outlaw flight is turning final for Nellis," Gary muttered, adjusting his mic. "2 ships, clean approach." Joanne didn't look away from her own sector monitor. She was watching a different flight, a pair of F-16s operating in the restricted airspace of the sprawling test range to the north. Call signs Outlaw 3 and Outlaw 4. They were running night vision ground attack simulations, high speed, low altitude. It was a dangerous game, one Joanne knew intimately. She remembered the sheer physical compression of pulling 9Gs in the pitch black, trusting only the green glow of the instruments and the deep, instinctual rhythm of the jet. Now, the new kids relied on upgraded avionics and collision avoidance software. They were system managers, not pilots. Or so her cynical side liked to tell her when the phantom pain in her spine flared up. Then, the sweep of the radar hitched. It was a tiny anomaly, a flicker in the telemetry data attached to Outlaw 3. The data block beside the glowing green dot blinked, hesitated, and then the altitude numbers began to spiral downward. Before Joanne could say a word, the main overhead speaker cracked with a sharp, ear-splitting burst of static. It wasn't the standard frequency. It was GARD, 243.0 MHz, the military distress frequency. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!" The voice was ragged, pitched high with a terror that cut through the sterile hum of the operations room like a razor blade. It was the sound of a human being realizing they were seconds away from evaporating into a mountainside. Gary dropped his pen. It rolled off the desk and clattered against the linoleum. He stared at his screen, paralyzed. "Mayday, Nellis Control, this is Outlaw 3. I'm hit. God, I can't see. Joanne's hand shot to her comms panel. The lethargy of the Enjo 300 shift vanished, entirely overridden by a 14-year-old muscle memory. She punched the button to isolate the frequency, locking out Gary's panel and routing the distress call directly into her headset. "Outlaw 3, this is Control," Joanne said. Her voice was flat, a heavy, unmovable anchor dropping into the frantic ocean of his panic. Level your wings. State your altitude and aircraft status. The radio crackled. The background noise on the transmission was deafening. It sounded like a hurricane was tearing through a tin can. That meant one thing. The canopy was gone. Control. I took a bird. Heavy foul, maybe a drone. It shattered the glass. The pilot was hyperventilating, each breath a desperate, wet gasp. Visor is smashed, blood in my eyes. I can't read the HUD. I can't see the horizon. Joanne's eyes darted to his telemetry. Altitude, 12,000 feet and dropping. Airspeed, 450 knots. He was in a shallow dive, banking dangerously to the left. At that speed, with a breached canopy, the wind blast inside the cockpit was likely pinning him to the seat, suffocating him, deafening him. "Outlaw 3, what is your name?" she demanded, keeping her tone devoid of sympathy. Sympathy got pilots killed. "Collins. Lieutenant Tommy Collins. Call sign Fetch. Listen to me, Fetch. This is Ops Supervisor Mitchell. You are descending. I need you to pull back on the stick. Just 2 inches. Do it now." "I can't see the instruments," Tommy screamed. The wind noise surged, nearly drowning him out. "I don't know my attitude. If I pull, I might roll it into the dirt." He was experiencing spatial disorientation. Vertigo. Without visual cues, the fluid in his inner ear was lying to him. His brain was telling him he was upside down or climbing, while the radar proved he was diving toward the granite teeth of the Nevada mountains. Joanne glanced at Gary, who was already reaching for the red phone to scramble the search and rescue choppers. Good. Let the kids handle the aftermath. She had to keep this kid in the air long enough for the choppers to have something to rescue. "Fetch, you are in an F-16C, Joanne said, her voice dropping an octave, slipping into a cadence she hadn't used since her days as a flight instructor. "I know that jet. I know it better than I know my own reflection. I have 3,000 hours in the Viper. I was flying them before you knew how to drive a car." There was a heavy beat of static. The wind roared over the open mic. "Mitchell," Tommy coughed, a wet, ragged sound. "Your Viper, the Viper." Joanne blinked. The old call sign hit her chest like a physical blow. It was a relic, a ghost from a past life where she was a predator of the skies, not a broken woman sipping cold coffee in a basement. The legend of her final flight, staying with a burning jet to steer it away from a populated valley before ejecting at the last possible, spine-shattering second, had apparently survived the generational turnover. "Yeah, kid," Joanne said softly, closing her eyes for a fraction of a second to lock away the memories of burning aviation fuel and the violent slam of an ejection seat. "I'm Viper." "Viper," Tommy choked out, his voice breaking entirely, shedding the tough guy facade of a fighter pilot and reducing him to a terrified boy in a broken machine. "Viper, please, talk me down." "First things first, Fetch. Lower your seat." Joanne didn't wait for him to process the command. She delivered it with the sharp, percussive force of a snare drum. The wind noise roaring over the comms was a physical assault on her eardrums, meaning Tommy was taking the brunt of a 400-knot slipstream directly to the face. "Switch on the left console," she barked. "Drop the seat to the floor. Get your head below the canopy rail. Do it now, Tommy." A few seconds of agonizing static followed. Joanne watched the green blip on her screen. Altitude 10,500. He was still descending. The desert floor in his sector was at roughly 4,000 feet above sea level. Mountains in the area peaked at 8,000. He had less than 30 seconds before he turned himself into a crater. "Seat! Seat is down!" Tommy gasped. The roar of the wind on the mic dropped marginally. It was still a hurricane, but now it was a hurricane outside a cracked door, rather than one blowing straight through the living room. "Better," Joanne said. "Now, take a breath, a real one. You're sucking air like a dying fish, and you're going to pass out from hyperventilation. Breathe in for 3, out for 3. I'm bleeding, Viper. My eyes, it burns. Let them burn. You don't need them right now. I have your eyes right here on my screen." Joanne's hands flew across her keyboard, pulling up the raw telemetry feed from his aircraft. It wasn't just radar anymore. She had a direct data link to his flight computer. She could see his pitch, roll, yaw, and engine RPM. "You're in a 5-degree dive, banked 15 degrees to the left," Joanne stated calmly. "The jet wants to fly, Tommy. The computers are fighting to keep you stable, but you're fighting the stick. Relax your grip." The F-16 was unique. It didn't have a center stick between the pilot's knees. It had a force-sensing side stick on the right console. It didn't move. It responded to pressure. When a pilot panicked, they tended to white-knuckle the stick, inadvertently feeding erratic inputs into the fly-by-wire system. "I'm trying," Tommy sobbed. "It's vibrating. The whole airframe is shaking." "That's asymmetric drag from the broken canopy," Joanne lied. It could be asymmetric drag, or it could be that the object he hit had ingested into the single jet engine behind him, chewing up the turbine blades. If the engine seized, they were done. There was no gliding in F-16. It had the glide ratio of a brick, but she wasn't going to tell him that. "Tommy, listen to my voice. Focus only on my voice. Apply 2 pounds of backward pressure on the stick. Just squeeze your hand slightly. Roll your wrist to the right. Gently." On her screen, the telemetry numbers flickered. Pitch: 5, 3, 0, +2. Roll: 15, 10, 0. "Hold it there," Joanne commanded. "You are wings level. You are in a slight climb. Airspeed is 380 knots. You are flying, kid." A heavy, shuddering exhale came over the radio. For a fleeting moment, Joanne felt a phantom vibration in her own right hand, a ghostly memory of holding a crippled jet in the air. The smell of ozone and fear seemed to leak through the air conditioning vents of the TOC. She shoved the feeling down. She had to be ice. If she cracked, he died. "Okay," Tommy said, his voice trembling but slower now. The panic was receding, replaced by the cold, heavy dread of reality. "I'm level. But Viper, I can't wipe my eyes. Every time I touch my face, I feel glass. If I open them, the wind dries the blood and it feels like razors." "Then keep them closed," Joanne said effortlessly. "You're going to fly this jet by Braille. The military paid $30 million for that airframe and another $2 million to train you. Today, you earn your paycheck blindfolded." She checked the fuel readouts. 4,000 pounds. Plenty of gas to get back to Nellis. But Nellis was 70 miles away, and getting him onto a runway without visual references was going to require an absolute miracle. The Instrument Landing System, ILS, could guide him, but he couldn't read the needles. "Gary," Joanne snapped, muting her mic for a split second. Gary jumped in his seat. "Yeah? Yes, ma'am? Get me a direct line to the Nellis Tower. Tell them to clear the airspace for a 50-mile radius. I want every crash truck lined up on runway 22 right, and get the runway lights turned up to maximum intensity. If this kid manages to pry one eye open at the last second, I want that strip looking like the Las Vegas Strip. On it, Gary said, his fingers finally flying over his console, glad to have a task that made sense. Joanne unmuted her mic. All right, Fetch. We are going to start a slow turn toward home. I want you to feel the jet. Don't think about the numbers. Think about the seat of your pants. I'm going to give you degrees of bank, and you are going to hold it. Viper, what if I have structural damage? Tommy asked. The fear was creeping back in. If I turn, the G-load might snap the wing. If you don't turn, you fly into Utah and run out of gas. We take the risk, Joanne said firmly. We don't deal in what-ifs right now. We deal in what is. And right now, you are a pilot, and you are flying a jet. Put a pound of pressure to the left. Give me 10 degrees of bank. She watched the telemetry. The jet banked. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the heading indicator began to spin. Hold bank. Keep your pitch positive. Joanne leaned closer to the monitor. The glow of the screen washed out the tired lines on her face, reflecting in her eyes like the heads-up display she hadn't seen in over a decade. She wasn't sitting in a bunker anymore. She was up there, in the cold, thin air, riding the edge of a knife. She could feel the sluggish response of the damaged airframe, could hear the protesting whine of the environmental control systems trying to pressurize a cockpit that was open to the sky. Coming around to heading 190, Joanne murmured. Roll out, Tommy. Smooth. Flatten it out. The numbers stopped moving. He was lined up. You're on the vector, Fetch. Straight shot to the barn. Viper? Tommy's voice was incredibly small against the roaring background of the wind. My left arm is going numb. Joanne's stomach dropped. That wasn't just fear. That was shock. Or worse, arterial bleeding from a shrapnel wound he hadn't noticed because of the adrenaline. The clock wasn't just ticking on his fuel anymore. It was ticking on his consciousness. Keep your hand on the throttle, Tommy, Joanne said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce whisper. You stay with me. You do not go to sleep. Do you hear me? I'm cold, he whispered back. Good. Cold means you're alive. Now push the power up 2%. We're going home fast. The silence on the radio was infinitely heavier than the static. Joanne stared at the telemetry data cascading down her secondary monitor. The numbers were raw, objective truths in a situation rapidly losing all structure. Altitude, 9,200 feet. Airspeed, 360 knots. Fuel flow, steady. But the biometric feed from the jet's life support umbilical told a different, darker story. Tommy's breathing rate was dropping. The frantic, wet gasps had smoothed out into shallow, irregular hitches. Fetch! Report! Joanne's voice was a steel rod, inflexible and demanding. Nothing. Just the relentless howl of the slipstream tearing past a shattered canopy at 400 miles an hour. Lieutenant Collins, you will key that mic and speak to me, or I swear to God I will come up there and rip you out of that seat myself. A garbled, metallic click. The mic keyed open. Still here, Viper. The voice was slurred. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving behind nothing but the cold reality of shock and blood loss. Me cold. Really cold. I know you are. We're dropping altitude. Thicker air means warmer air. I want you to slowly pull the throttle back 1/4 of an inch. We need to descend, but I don't want you picking up speed." She watched the engine RPM gauge on her screen. It didn't move. "Tommy, throttle." "My left arm," he mumbled. "It's pinned or something. Doesn't want to work." Joanne's jaw tightened. She reached up and massaged the bridge of her nose, fighting off a sudden, crushing wave of fatigue. In an F-16, the throttle is on the left console. The flight stick is on the right. If he couldn't use his left arm, he couldn't control his airspeed. If he couldn't control his airspeed, she couldn't guide him down a glide slope. He would either stall and fall out of the sky like a stone, or he would hit the runway going way too fast and shear the landing gear clean off. She muted the mic. "Gary?" Gary flinched. He had been staring at Joanne, completely transfixed, the red phone to Nellis Tower still clutched in his hand. "Yeah, ready." "Tell Tower we have a complication. Pilot is experiencing localized paralysis or severe trauma to the left extremity. Ejection is no longer a viable backup." Gary blinked. "Wait, what? If he can't land, he has to punch out. Standard procedure. Standard procedure assumes a pilot who can sit upright and brace for a 40G rocket kick," Joanne snapped, her eyes never leaving the screen. "He's slouched, bleeding, and weak. If he pulls the ejection handle in that posture, the seat will shatter his spine and sever his spinal cord. I know. I've seen the X-rays." She paused, the phantom ache in her own lower back throbbing in time with the blinking radar. "We land this jet, or he dies in it. Tell Tower to roll the foam trucks. I want a wet runway." Gary swallowed hard, nodding, and started speaking rapidly into the red phone. Joanne unmuted her headset. She had to bypass the left arm entirely. "Okay, Fetch. Change of plans. You are going to use your right hand for everything. Take your hand off the stick. Reach over, pull the throttle back just a hair, and then put your hand immediately back on the stick. The jet will dip when you let go. Let it. The computers will catch it." "Take my hand off?" Tommy sounded vaguely horrified. "Do it!" The telemetry hitched. The pitch dropped to -3 degrees. The RPM gauge spooled down slightly. Then the pitch leveled out as Tommy grabbed the stick again. "Good, very good," Joanne lied. It was sloppy, terrifyingly dangerous flying, but it worked. "Altitude is 7,500. We are clearing the mountain ridges. I am vectoring you straight in for runway 22 right at Nellis. You are 30 miles out." "Viper," Tommy interrupted. His voice was gaining a strange, eerie calm. The panic was entirely gone, replaced by the profound, dangerous acceptance that precedes unconsciousness. "I can't keep my eyes shut anymore. It feels wrong. But when I open them, it's just red and black." "Don't focus on the dark," Joanne said, leaning forward until her forehead was nearly touching the cool glass of the monitor. "You focus on the vibration of the seat. You focus on the smell of the oxygen mix. You focus on the heavy feeling in your gut. You are part of the machine, Tommy. The machine wants to live. Let it." A warning light flashed on her console. A yellow master caution indicator from his data link. "Check your warning panel, Joanne," a calm voice said behind her. She didn't turn. It was the shift supervisor, a gray-haired major named Harris, who rarely left his glass-walled office. He was standing right behind her chair now, arms crossed, staring at the main overhead screen. Joanne had already seen it. Hydraulic pressure line B was fluctuating. The bird, or drone, or whatever heavy object had smashed through Tommy's canopy had likely struck the fuselage behind the cockpit, damaging a secondary line. "I see it," Joanne murmured. "Line B is bleeding pressure." "If he loses B, he loses backup brakes and nose wheel steering," Harris noted flatly. "He won't need steering if we can't get his wheels on the pavement," Joanne fired back, her tone lacking any military deference. "Down here, in the dark, rank didn't land jets. Competence did." She keyed the mic again. "Tommy, we are 20 miles out. It's time to dirty up. I need you to reach across with your right hand again. Drop the landing gear. The handle is shaped like a wheel on the left instrument panel. Left panel, right hand, got it." A long, agonizing pause. Thump, thump, thump. The heavy, metallic clunks echoed clearly over the radio as the 3 landing gear struts deployed and locked into the slipstream. The drag was immediate. Joanne watched his airspeed bleed off rapidly, dropping from 350 to 250 knots in seconds. "Gear is down and locked," Joanne confirmed, reading the 3 green indicators mirrored on her data link. "Airspeed is dropping. Reach over, bump the throttle up. We need to hold 180 knots until the threshold. Do not let this jet stall, Tommy. Stay with me." "I'm trying, Viper," Tommy whispered. "But it's getting really quiet in here." It wasn't quiet. The wind was still roaring. What Tommy was experiencing was auditory exclusion, as his brain began to shut down non-essential functions to preserve oxygen for his fading organs. He was bleeding out. "Gary," Joanne said, her voice dropping to a gravelly register. "Tell the crash crews they have a 2-minute window from the moment he stops moving to get a tourniquet on him. If they wait for the engines to spool down, he's gone." "Nellis Tower confirms," Gary said, his voice tight. "Runway 22 right is clear. Crash crews are staged. Foam is down. Lights are maxed." Joanne didn't care about the lights. Tommy couldn't see a Christmas tree if it was strapped to his radome. She needed to translate digital geometry into physical sensation for a pilot who was half dead. 10 miles out, Fetch," Joanne said. "You are on the glide slope. Altitude 3,000 feet. The runway is at 1800. Descend at a rate of 500 feet per minute. We do this by tiny increments of pressure. No sudden movements." "Tiny pressure," Tommy echoed. Joanne watched the angle of attack indexer on her screen. In a normal landing, lights on the HUD told a pilot if the nose was too high or low. Right now, Joanne had to be those lights. "Your nose is a degree high, Tommy. Release a fraction of an ounce of pressure on the stick. Let the jet settle." She watched the digital horizon line dip. "Hold that. Perfect. Airspeed 175 knots. You are a freight train on invisible tracks. Do not deviate." The talk was dead silent. Every airman had stopped working, staring at the massive main screen. A single green dot creeping down a digital slope toward a flat white line. 5 miles. Joanne's mouth was dry. Her knuckles were white, gripping the desk. She was flying the jet with her mind, anticipating the aerodynamic lag, feeling the drag of the gear. "Viper," Tommy breathed. "I don't want to die in the dark." The raw vulnerability tore through the clinical room. "You're not dying today, kid," Joanne said. Her voice wasn't a harsh command anymore. It was a tether, thick and unyielding. "You're coming home. When you get out of that jet, the desert sun is going to be coming up. It'll be the brightest thing you've ever seen. But you have to earn it. 3 miles. The runway threshold crossed the 2-mile mark. Altitude 2,200. Reach over and pull the throttle back just a sliver. We need 160 knots. Telemetry showed the RPM drop. 170, 165, 160. Hand back on the stick. Center it. It's shaking, Tommy rattled, the airframe hitting turbulent thermals rising off the desert floor. Let it shake. You are a rock. 1 mile. Joanne's eyes darted between altimeter and sink rate. 200 feet above ground, 100 over the threshold. This was it, the flare. Pitch up too much. The jet floats and drops like an anvil. Don't pitch up at all. He drives the nose gear straight through the cockpit floor. 50 feet. Stand by. Joanne held her breath, feeling the exact sink rate of the F-16 she had flown 1,000 times. 30 feet. Pull back gently. 2 pounds of pressure. Hold it. The pitch moved to Payur 4 degrees. Perfect landing attitude. Throttle to idle. Kill the power, Tommy. Now. The RPM gauge plummeted. The jet coasted inches above the concrete. Hold the pitch. Over the open mic, a deafening screech of rubber obliterating itself against concrete ripped through the headsets. Screech. Thud. Main gear is down, Gary yelled. Hold the stick back, Tommy. Aerodynamic braking. Let the drag do the work. Airspeed dropped. 120, 100. Let the nose fall smoothly. A lighter thump echoed. Nose gear is down. You're on the deck. Hit the brakes. Telemetry showed a massive hydraulic spike as Tommy stomped the pedals. But then, line B flatlined. Lost backup pressure, Harris barked behind her. He has primary, Joanne countered. Keep on the brakes, Tommy. The jet fought him. The crosswind pushed the vertical stabilizer, trying to rip the aircraft off the runway. Right rudder, Joanne commanded. Just a tap. Keep it on the center line. Speed dropped. 80 knots. 50. 20. 0. The green dot stopped moving. Telemetry froze. Through the radio, the heavy roar of crash trucks surrounded the jet. Frantic shouting cut through the wind. Canopy is gone! Cut his harness! Get a C-collar on him! Joanne sat frozen. Her hands shook so violently she pressed them flat against the desk to stop the rattling. We got him, a paramedic shouted directly into the mic. He's unconscious, pulse is thready, but he's alive. We're pulling him out. The radio cut to static. Gary let out a breath like a deflating tire, slumping over his console. Weary applause broke out across the room. Major Harris squeezed Joanne's shoulder and walked away. Joanne didn't move. She slowly pulled the heavy headset off, letting it rest around her neck. The TOC was still a windowless bunker. Her spine still burned with familiar fire. But as she looked at the blank screen, for the first time in 14 years, the phantom weight of the jet was gone. She stood up, ignoring the sharp pull in her leg. She needed a fresh cup of coffee and a window to watch the sunrise. True survival requires more than just machinery. It demands the unbreakable thread of human connection when the world goes dark. Joanne and Tommy proved that the harshest limits of the sky can be beaten by a steady voice and unyielding trust. If this story of raw grit and blind courage kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to see the power of resilience, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories.